Good day, Computer Science 2A. Today I'm going to provide you with a tutorial on how to implement a very basic visitor design pattern. Now, if we look at the structure of the visitor design pattern that was discussed in the lecture, the visitor is made up of two very important interfaces. The abstract visitor that defines the visit functions for each concrete object that we want to then visit. We also have the abstract visitable interface that defines the accept methods that allow the concrete visitor to then visit the concrete visitables. So in this tutorial, we're going to do this by means of an example of a printer visitor. So the visitor is going to be responsible for printing things. So we're going to have instead of a concrete visitable A and a concrete visitable B, we're going to have a document to get printed as well as a label to get printed. Just as a basic example that will make use of text that we can then have a visitor visit and display. So to get started, I've created a project, and inside this project, let us create a new package, and the package is going to be called model. And it's called model because we're going to put all of the objects that we create inside of this model package because they're going to model the data and the way that we interact with it. Let's then create a new class that is going to be the main of the program, which will be functioning as the client. So the main of the program is going to act as the client in this example. So the client, if we have a look at the structure of the design pattern, is going to be responsible for enabling the visitor to interact with the visitables. So in this case, we're going to have a printer that is going to print the document and the label. So let's start out by creating our two very important interfaces, one for the visitable and one for the visitor. And let's do that inside of the model. So let's create a new interface, and I'm going to create this new interface as the iPrint visitor. So this is going to be the abstract visitor interface, aptly named with visitor in the title. You will note that I have put the main in the wrong place, so I'm just going to move it out into the source of the program. Okay, and I will put it inside the default package. So I now have the main there. I can now delete the duplicate here. This is only happening because I didn't click in the right place when I wanted to create the main for the program. So this client is the entry point for the program. And now we have an iPrint visitor. Now this iPrint visitor is going to be our abstract visitor interface that is going to be responsible for defining the ability to then print our various kinds of objects. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's create the next interface that we require. So a new interface, and this interface I am going to call the iPrintable interface. So this particular interface is going to define the operations of the abstract visitable. So it's going to have the accept methods. So therefore, this iPrintable interface is going to be the abstract visitable. Okay, so inside the abstract visitable, we're going to have our accept methods. Then flipping over to the abstract visitor interface, iPrint visitor, inside of the iPrint visitor, we need to then have our print methods. Okay, so if you go back to our diagram, we have now created the abstract visitor interface in the form of the iPrint visitor, and we will add the print methods to it now shortly. We have created the abstract visitable interface in the form of iPrintable, and we were going to add the accept methods in a little bit to it. Okay, so now that we've created these two interfaces, we can now begin defining from the printable interface, which is the abstract visitable interface, the structure of the accept method that we require. So I always advocate create the interfaces first and then start building it from the abstract visitable, because this one here's structure is never going to change. It is always going to have a public void accept method, and the accept method is going to take the parameter of the visitor interface that we have just created. So that would be our iPrint visitor, and I'm just going to call it V for this time, or visitor, or whatever you want to name it, doesn't really matter. But it's very important that when we look at the structure, we have the iPrint visitor, which is of the same name type as that of our iPrint visitor interface, because that's the way it is going to work. Okay, so now that is all we need to do for the abstract visitable interface. That is literally everything that is required. We're done with that one. We can close it and get on with the rest of our program. Now that we have the iPrintable, which is going to be the abstract visitable, this is our iPrintable now, we can now begin going and implementing the data classes. So we can add as many of these as we want. So we're going to create a document and we're going to create a label. So let's add a new class, and this class I am going to call document. Okay, and this document class must implement the iPrintable interface. And you'll note there's going to give us an error here because it says we must implement that abstract method. So if we were to just mouse over here and do the quick fix, we could add the unimplemented methods, and we now have the accept method that we need to then be able to make the visitor work. Okay, so since as we actually don't have this functionality defined yet, it doesn't really matter for now. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add the next model class, which is going to be our label class. So new class label. Okay, we now have our label class. It needs to also implement the iPrintable interface. It'll give us the same error. We need to then have it that we implement that abstract method. So if we mouse over, it should then give us the ability. Oh, it's not giving me the ability to do that. I wonder why. Oh, there we go. Add unimplemented method. There we go. We now have our accept method, which will be then responsible for allowing the visitor to access the data. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to now give the concrete visitables, say the document and the over here, the label, they both have to have the ability now to actually accept the visitor and give the visitor access to the data. So this can be done in many different ways, but they're all going to be based on the fact that we need to have this visit functionality. So you can name this visit functionality however you want. So let's say if we look at the label we actually want to have the ability to be printed. The document, we also want to have the ability to be printed. So we want them to be printed via the visitor by going visitor.print, and then we want to pass ourselves as the data. Now, this won't work yet because we haven't implemented the print method, but what this will enable, if we look at our diagram, is this accept method will then enable that this object can pass itself as a parameter to the visitor interface, which means that any concrete visitor that then goes and uses its visit method, in this case we've called it the print method, can then go and access the data it requires. So you'll note here that there's this print method. but this print method hasn't actually been created inside of the visitor. And you will note that the quick fix here actually gives us a quick option. So let's see what happens if we click create method. And you'll note that if we go to our iPrint visitor and we did the auto correct there, that it has given us the structure of the visit method. So this is our visit method. We've just named it something different called print. Now the reason I do this is because in every question you're going to get, the visit method is going to be different depending on the usage scenario. So if you're a painter, you're going to paint. If you're a sketch artist, you're going to draw. If we're a printer, as is the case in this particular example, we're going to print. So let's go across to our label now, who is also missing that particular visit method. So let us now add the visit method by going v.print, and then we can pass in this. Now that means that any instance of our label can then be printable. And now, if we mouse over, we can then add that to the iPrint visitor. You'll note that it's overwritten the other one. So let us quickly just copy that and paste it and put in a document over here. So if we look back at our design now, we have implemented the visit methods for visiting concrete visitable A, the document, and visiting concrete visitable B, which in this case is the label. So if we look at the iPrint visitor interface, which is our abstract visitor interface, we now have a print method, aka our visit method for a label, as well as a print method, aka the visit method for the document. Likewise, if we go and look at the document now has the ability to be printed via any object that implements the iPrint visitor interface. Likewise with the label has the ability to be visited, i.e. printed, via any iPrint visitor via its accept method, the accept method being defined in the iPrintable interface. So this is the main structure of the visitor design pattern that we have just implemented in a couple of quick steps. So let's save all of that and now have a look at what we can actually do with this. So at the moment, these two concrete visitables, the document as well as the label, have the ability to be visited by any class that implements the abstract visitor interface, i.e. our iPrint visitor interface. But these classes don't have any data that actually makes them useful to us. So inside of our document, let's add some attributes and operations that will then give us the feel for what the data is going to be. So let's create a private string, and it's going to be our document text. This is going to then store the text for our document. We're also going to have a private string, and this is going to be our page size, because you know with a document you can have an A4 page size, an A5 page size, an A whatever page size. So we can have some flexibility there. Let's now add a constructor. So public document, and it's going to accept two parameters, and I'm going to name it string text as well as string size for the page size. If we were to implement these, we could then go page size equals size. So now we can instantiate a new object with a parameterized constructor, which will just serve the purpose of our project. But now, if we're going to give access to the visitor when it implements this interface, it needs to be able to access this data, but I've made it private. Therefore, I'm going to have to provide some form of accesses to enable me to gain access to this particular data so that then the visitor can then print it. So we're going to need to have a public string get document text that is going to be responsible for returning our document page size. So now this class has all the information we need to model the document. It has the text of what the document is, and it has the page size of the document that we need to access. So let's go and actually create a document inside of our main that we can then populate with some information. So inside of our main, we are going to need to first import the particular parts of our model that we need. So let us import over here model.document. Now we can actually instantiate a document. So we have a document, and I'm going to just call it my doc1, and it's going to be a new document. And by using our parameterized constructor, I can give the document some text. This is an A4 document, and I can give it a page size. So let's print this one on, let's say, A4 page. I can also create a different document. Document my doc2 equals new document, and likewise I can provide it with some document text. So let's make this one, say, an A5 document, and that's the text that goes inside the document, and then that would be the A5 of the page size. Okay, so now if I wanted to traditionally display the document and print it, I'd have to create a print method of some kind, or I'd have to make use of the accessors directly to access the data for the text and the page size and then display that. And then if I wanted to change it, I had to go and then change all those methods. So instead, we could actually make use of a visitor that will enable us to do that. Okay, so let's create first a label. Since as we have a document that has all of its data and all the required functionality for the visitor, let us now just quickly name this. This is going to be our concrete visitable A class, and therefore the label is going to be the concrete visitable B class. Okay, so let's give this label some data and operations that will be meaningful for it. So first, let's give it a private string, and this is going to be called label text. So a label is a sticky piece of paper that gets stuck on something that has some text. But there are different kinds of labels. So let's also have a private boolean and call it is shipping label. So a shipping label is a much bigger kind of label that gets stuck on a box as opposed to just a regular label that you stick on a book or something like that. So the next thing we need to do is, now that we have those particular private data members, is create a constructor for them. So private label, and let's create a parameterized constructor that accepts two pieces, or rather two parameters of a string, text, and then a boolean shipping label. Therefore, we can now instantiate the object and then initialize the data by the parameters. So label text equals text, and then the is shipping label. Okay, so now that we have the constructor, we need to do what we did before with the document. That is, we need to create the accessors that will give us the ability to get the data that we need, so that the visitor has the ability to get the label text and the shipping label, whether or not it is a shipping label, so that it can then print them appropriately. Okay, so to do this, we're going to create a public string get label text, and that is then going to return label text. We're going to create another accessor here for a public boolean get is shipping label, and this will then be responsible for returning the isPrintVisitor interface, and it will automatically pop up with the ability for you to remedy the problem that this particular concrete class doesn't implement the required methods and implement them. So you'll now note that this particular visitor has now been given the ability to print a label and print a document just by it implementing the iPrintVisitor or the visitor interface. So now all we need to do is define how this printer prints things. So some printers print using laser, some printers print using ink, some old printers print using dot matrix. We're just going to use this example to just print the text out to our console. So now we're going to define the functionality to print a label that is passed to us. Likewise, we're then going to provide the ability to print a document that is passed to us. So in order for this to work, we are then going to need to access the required data provided by the accept method. Because remember, when we are going to get the visitor to actually visit, it happens via the main of the program, because the main of the program is the client. The client is going to get the visitor to visit each of the concrete visitables. So in order for this to happen, we need to, inside of our main, instantiate the visitor. This is kind of like us buying the printer that we're going to use to now print. So we need to have a visitor instance. So in order to do this, we're going to create, and then we should have a print text visitor. Okay, so now we have the visitor and we have the documents in the main, which is the client of our program. The main, which is the client, now needs to make the visitor go and visit the visitables, so that the visitables can then accept the visitor and pass their data to the visitor via the interface so that the printing can take place. So inside of our main, this requires that we then take each of our documents, doc.accept the visitor. So what this entails is that the main or the client of our program is telling the visitor to go and visit the document, but the document must then accept the visitor to then pass its data to the visitor. Likewise, we can do this for the doc2 and get the visitor to go and visit that particular document. We can also do this for each of our individual labels, where we make each of the labels accept the visitor. Okay, so this is the final part where we actually make the visitor go and visit the visitables. Okay, and this is done by first making it that we define the visitor. So if we go over here to our document, we are defining this accept method. So we are then going to pass the visitor into this accept method. So v.printThis. So it will then go to the visitor and call the visit method, which is the print method that we named it, and pass in our self as the parameter, which means when we go to the concrete print text visitor via the visitor interface, because here we've got the print document method, we now have to implement the print method for the document and the print method for the label to indicate what this particular visitor does with that information. So now, inside the visitor, for say we were talking about the document, we can do something like system.out.print print line, and we can print, say, some information just for the sake of whatever we are doing. And we could go something like, we are printing a document, just to test to see that our document printing is working. And if we are printing a label, we can now also do that, but just name it here label. And now what we should be able to do from the main of our program is test to see if the visitor is actually going and visiting those objects. So if we were to now run our program and have a look over here in our console, once it's done compiling, we are printing a document, we are printing a document, we are printing a label, we are printing a label, which indicates that the visitor is visiting a document, the visitor is visiting a document, the visitor is visiting a label, and thereafter the visitor is visiting a label. Now this is not very useful to us because it doesn't actually display any information, or rather it doesn't print any information that relates to the individual documents that we want. So let's go back to our visitor. So inside the visitor, we can now update this to do things like display what the page size is we want to print. So let's go the information that we're going to then print. So the information that we're going to print is going to be document.get document text. What this will enable us to do is now print out the size of the document as well as the actual document text. So let's quickly run our program and see what we get. So you will note here it says we are printing a document, page size is A4. This document, this is an A4 document. Then we're printing the next document, which is an A5 document, and it says we're printing the A5 document. So you can see now that via the accept method, we then pass the object itself via its this reference to this particular visitor print method, which then extracts the data from it to then print. So if we were to go and just update the label functionality, we could go and do something like, let's do this. Let's go if label dot get is shipping label. This will determine if it is a shipping label. So if it is a shipping label, we could then print the shipping label text. If not, we could do something different. So sys out